When thought of in relation to the Jedi and Sith, the definition of a Gray Jedi might appear to be rather simple. On a spectrum consisting of the light side and the dark side, it would seem easy enough. The Jedi are on one side, and the Sith are on the opposite side, and then the Gray Jedi would fall in the middle between them. In this way, the Gray Jedi appear to be their own unified group, consisting of Force users who aren't adherents strictly to the light or dark, and who aren't necessarily members of the Jedi or Sith orders. Although this conclusion does hold up for some Force users and organizations, the definition of a Gray Jedi is actually far more complex. A Gray Jedi doesn't refer to a single unified group, but numerous groups that can be extremely different from each other. But at the core, they share the title of Gray Jedi. In this video expose, we'll look at 5 types of Gray Jedi, differentiating them based upon their relationship with the Jedi High Council, the light and dark sides of the Force, and the beliefs contained within the Jedi Code. Our first group of Gray Jedi are those Jedi who distance themselves from the Order's High Council. Normally, one might think that this is the group of Jedi that Qui-Gon Jinn would fall under. But for our first group of Gray Jedi here, we're talking about dissident Jedi with a far greater legacy who rebelled against the Jedi High Council millennia before Qui-Gon, and in ways that were far more extreme. Following the first Jedi Purge almost 4,000 years before the rise of Darth Sidious, the Jedi Order was on the brink of collapse through the efforts of the Sith. However, although the Sith almost succeeded in annihilating the Jedi Order, the Jedi were saved by the previously exiled Jedi Meetra Surik, who succeeded in defeating the Sith triumvirate of Traya, Nihilus, and Sion. More importantly, Surik would train a new generation of Jedi, which would go on to revive the Order after the Purge. But as war continued to spread across the galaxy, and having just faced potential eradication, the Jedi that rose after the Purge began to believe that a new strong central authority was necessary to protect the Order. This resulted in the Jedi High Council implementing new edicts and standards that would govern the Order's members, as well as a consolidation of its own power over all Jedi and their affairs. These revisions to the Jedi Code included age restrictions on all new members of the Order, stricter limitations on Jedi attachments and the establishment of families, and a complete restriction on all Force abilities that utilize the dark side. The numerous Jedi who disagreed with these new directives and the rising authority of the Jedi High Council were recognized as Gray Jedi by the Order, due to their persistence of continuing the tradition of using dark side Force abilities and their clashes with the Jedi Code. Therefore, these members in our first group of Gray Jedi were those Jedi who were true dissenters, Jedi Knights who rebelled and recoiled at the pillars that would define the Order over the millennia to come. They didn't simply disagree with the High Council. They distanced themselves from the High Council due to the direction of the Order, and for that, they were seen as Gray Jedi. Our second group of Gray Jedi are closely related to this first group. Although they too earned the title of Gray due to their disagreements with the High Council, these Gray Jedi represented a complete watering down of this label over the millennia of Jedi history. Over time, any disagreement came to be seen as undesirable, and thus would result in the label of Gray. As Jedi Chief Librarian Restelli Quist would write roughly 1,000 years before the Clone War, the so-called Gray Jedi have been with us since the beginning. Although they do not break with the Jedi orthodoxy concerning the dark side, they bristle when asked to take orders from the Council. They are mavericks who are difficult to control, but can be valued members of the Order after they have been persuaded to follow the established hierarchy. Therefore, in the 3,000 years since the first Jedi Purge, it no longer required a Jedi to question the key pillars of the Order and the authority of the High Council to be given the title of Gray. By the end of the new Sith Wars, it simply required them to be unenthusiastic and embittered about the assignments given to them by the High Council. This is a drastic change from the dissension seen from those Gray Jedi in our first group, as Gray Jedi within the second would be those like Qui-Gon Jinn. The label was earned not for any use or relation to the dark side, but simply being seen as a maverick and disagreeing with the High Council on day-to-day matters of the Order. Like the previous two groups, the third type of Gray Jedi is still reserved for those that were legitimate members of the Jedi Order, earning its ranks and learning the tenets of the Jedi Code. However, these Jedi weren't merely dissidents who quarreled with the High Council. They were true Renegade Jedi due to their desertion of the principles codified within the Jedi Code. The best example of this third group is seen in the beliefs of the Gray Paladins. We recently discussed the Gray Paladins in our video on how Order 66 affected Gray Jedi, but to briefly recap, they were a faction of Jedi that held far more radical views than other Jedi within the main order. Although they still dedicated themselves to the Jedi Code and had their headquarters inside the Coruscant Jedi Temple, they had a much more militant philosophy, believing Jedi should use a wide range of weapons outside of the traditional lightsaber. Perhaps even more important in earning these Renegade Jedi the title of Gray, their view of the Force was completely different than that of the Jedi Orders. The Paladins believed in minimal use of the Force, seeing it as an influence upon their lives and not an end that should necessarily be used directly. Of course, this was in stark contrast to the philosophy of the main Jedi Order, who rejected the view that they should act independently of the Force as much as possible. Therefore, the Gray Paladins distinctly represent a third type of Gray Jedi. Those who were members of the traditional Jedi Order and even dedicated themselves to the Jedi Code, but formed a separate and distinct faction through their unique philosophical approaches to the Force. With our final two groups, we'll see that to receive the title of Gray Jedi, one didn't have to necessarily be a member of the Jedi Order, despite the name. As we saw in our first group, although it didn't have to always be the case, but the Gray component did matter at times, with Gray Jedi typically being unencumbered in their use of both light and dark side Force abilities. It's this non-reliance upon just one side of the Force that is key for our fourth group of Gray Jedi. Force users who weren't Jedi and who walked the line between the light and dark sides without falling completely to the dark. The best examples of these types of Gray Jedi are seen with two Force organizations, the Jedi and the Imperial Knights. In both cases, these two organizations in our fourth group earn the title of Gray Jedi due to their acceptance of a Gray approach to the Force. In the case of the Jedi, their philosophy was a combination of light and dark side teachings, taking relatively equally from the teachings of the Jedi and the Sith. For the Imperial Knights, these Force users did accept the light and reject the dark, but they were not servants of the light side in the same way the Jedi were. Their use of the Force was primarily in service to their Emperor, and because their duty was first and foremost to the Emperor and they only indirectly served the light side, they were given the title of Gray Jedi by the Jedi Order. Therefore, this fourth group is probably my favorite on our list, as it comprised Force users who weren't Jedi like those in our first three groups, and who weren't merely servants of the light side, walking the line between both sides of the Force, dedicating themselves to neither side exclusively as the Sith and Jedi did. And in the final spot on our list of 5 types of Gray Jedi, we again have Force users who weren't members of the Jedi Order. But unlike the previous group, these Force users didn't necessarily earn their title of Gray due to their walking the line between the light and dark, like the Jedi. Instead, these Force users were Gray Jedi in the eyes of the Jedi Order simply because they refused to accept their methods. An example of this type of Gray Jedi is seen within the Force organization known as the Voss Mystics. When they were located by the Jedi roughly 3,600 years before the Clone War, it was recognized that their views on the Force were completely unique, despite the fact that their actual knowledge of the mystical power was almost non-existent. However, because the Voss Mystics refused to be trained by the Jedi and accept their interpretations of the Force, they were labeled as Gray Jedi. It was also most likely due to the fact that their views of the Force ultimately could lead them to accept the dark in some ways, but this wasn't a necessary condition to their being viewed as Gray. Therefore, unlike the Imperial Knights and Jedi, the fifth group of Gray Jedi consisted of Force users who weren't Jedi and didn't necessarily walk the line between the light and dark, but who had different views and refused training from the Jedi Order. Let me know down in the comments section below what your favorite group of Gray Jedi is out of the 5 mentioned here. Also, we could do an entire video on it, but let me know if you think Ahsoka is a Gray Jedi. Does she fall into one of these 5 categories, or are there other elements and legends that could make her a Gray Jedi? I look forward to reading your replies. So there we have it, 5 types of Gray Jedi. We love making these videos, so why not subscribe for more fun Star Wars theories and discussions. Also, if you enjoyed the video, think about giving a like or leaving a comment. Or perhaps follow us on Twitter at SW Reading Club for updates regarding the channel. Or support the channel through Patreon for access to exclusive rewards and discussions. If not for me, for Jolie.